Elder Bates, tonight's study on probation, or the close of probation and the 7 last plagues, there seems to be a lot of misinformation and gaps in what people know about this. What is the difference between the 7 last plagues that are going to be on the wicked and the plagues that fell upon the people in Egypt? And what is the impact of the plagues that are going to fall on the wicked in the last days?
You know, that's an interesting point, because we notice in Revelation 15 and 16 it says 7 last plagues. I don't know if there can be anything further past or last more than what the last is. So when we're talking about 7 last plagues, that must mean the final visitation of God's wrath upon this wicked world. And I think there's been some terrible mistakes made in our authorized books over this very subject. It has caused confusion among the people, and we seem to put off too far in the future all the time. If we would live more in present time, Jesus is going to come soon. The Adventists at one time did believe that Jesus would come in their lifetime. Now, I have believed that all my life, and of course now I'm getting to the age where my time is slipping by. I still believe that Jesus could come, but there are certain things that simply have to happen before we can expect Jesus to come. I've heard in the last few months, I've heard people saying, well, 2004 is the year Jesus is going to come. I said, oh, wait. Now, have you been reading the books? Have you been studying? There are certain things that have to happen before Jesus comes.
But can't they happen in very rapid succession?
Well, if it's the day of the Lord's wrath or the year of his recompense, that must mean a year's time.
Oh, I see.
And we can use probably 3 Bible verses to help us with that matter. When Babylon is destroyed, we say that the day of her destruction, well, a day is a year. There's certain things that we need to take into consideration here, so we can see exactly, and I believe there's a spot we'll use in the Spirit of Prophecy books that gives us the exact steps that Jesus follows when he finishes his intercession. Let's turn in our Bible and let's read a couple of verses here. Let's go to Revelation 15, and let's read a little what the record has to say. Revelation 15, we'll start reading with verse 1. And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them is filled up the wrath of God. Now, it very specifically says the 7 last plagues. Now, I might mention that just before we start this video, we have prayed and asked the Lord to bless his Bible study. So if you missed that, you'll see that we have already done that. Then verse 2, and I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stand on a sea of glass, having the harps of God. There's a point here that's very, very strange, is this number of his name. There's probably been an ocean of ink wasted on articles on how to figure out the number of his name. We'll use that word, vicarious filii. This is all we have heard. But we know that there are many ways to come up with 666. There are many ways to come up with that. A person's name, like the word Phoenix, we think of Phoenix, Arizona. Well, in a Greek language, that Phoenix represents 666. You see? So there are so many different ways that we can understand this. Excuse me. Logos and signs. 3 wavy lines, or even 3 sevens. I've seen signs would look like a 7 laying down the full length of a trailer that a truck is pulling on the freeway. Well, there you have those wavy lines. Pepsi-Cola, that circle with those three wavy lines, red, white, and blue. You'll see it every time you drink a Coca-Cola or a Pepsi-Cola. You'll see that. Excuse me, I have to strain my voice a bit. So there are, the signs and symbols today are many, many things to represent this. Now these plagues are going to be poured out upon these people.
Yeah.
They're going to be poured out those that have this mark. Let's use another illustration. The 666. In your Sabbath School Quarterly, you look and you see a capital A. In fact, I have one here that I could show you. And the capital A has three wavy lines to it. That's a big A with three wavy lines. Now those wiggle lines are paganistic symbols. And one time the pagans used that fluently. 666.
What did it stand for?
Huh?
What did it stand for?
Well, it is a pagan symbol of that number, 666. Even Solomon was allotted 666 talents of silver every year. That's his allotted. That was his wages. We pay our president. Solomon got his wages, 666 talents. Excuse me again. So what is the symbolic thing? Paganism borrowed that. They borrowed those symbols. I'm going to have trouble with my throat. I'm going to stop it. I'm going to make a correction there. I've checked the Bible verse, 1 Kings 10:14. Listen what it says. Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. I said silver. I'm sorry I said that. So the gold was weighed 666 talents. It's a strange thing about pagan worship. They didn't have anything that they could really worship. So they borrowed the religious rites and ceremonies from the Jewish people. Now, not only the Assyrians, when I use the word Assyria, we're actually covering about 1,700 years of Bible history, because we have Syria, Babylon, and Chaldea all mean the same thing. It's the same nation, and that nation, in its duration, not just Nebuchadnezzar, but in those names, continued about 1,700 years. Now, it's strange to notice that when the Chinese began Confucianism, and when the Buddhists began Buddhism, they still had to have something to worship. Now, they could worship Buddha, but there was no salvation beyond the grave. And so they borrowed also from the Jewish people that this would be a savior, and then that rejuvenated their pagan worship, and it gave the pagans something to look forward to, see, like Semiramis and Nimrod's day, and it's all set up on Jewish forms and ceremonies. Even the Samaritans in the time of Christ, now they were not a bad people, but the Jews hated them. They hated the Samaritans. And you remember when Jesus came to that woman in Samaria, he was very tender and kind to her, and she was the means of bringing salvation to a lot of those Samaritan people. Okay, so we have these symbols that really mean a lot to us in Bible prophecy. And although, as the plagues are read here, I want to go down just a little ways farther in the 7th and 8th verses of chapter 15. And one of the four beasts gave unto the seven angels 7 golden vials full of the wrath of God, who liveth forever and ever. Now I want to try to make a correction there. When you see these beasts that's described here, actually that is from translation. When you read the first 2 or 3 or 4 chapters of Ezekiel, you find that Ezekiel called them creatures. Mm-hmm. And that's really what they should have named these men here. Because we have the 24 elders, we have that in verse 5, 6, 7, 8. The 24 elders, and those 4 beasts are 4 creatures. And evidently when these men were selected, because they were redeemed from the earth, so we know they were men. When these men were redeemed, seems that there were 4 outstanding characteristics among these 24 elders. Now I'm going to assume that, because I have no way of proving that from this book. There might have been 24 elders plus the 4 creatures. But I'm going to say those 4 creatures might have been selected from those 24 elders. Now, what would they represent? Maybe one of them would represent quickness to obey. Another one might have perseverance, an outstanding characteristic above all the other ones. Or maybe meekness. Now, when I say meekness, who would you think of?
Moses.
Moses. So it's very possible he could have been one of those creatures, you see, not beasts. And when it was translated, that word was not translated really quite like it should have, because that translation should have agreed with the book of Ezekiel. And this is what inspiration does for us. You might read something here, if you form your opinion in this chapter, you might make a mistake. And that's why you want to use inspiration. The same when you study the spirit of prophecy. Don't read one quotation unless you've considered time and place must be considered. And we can actually read that to you. Time and place must be considered. Because everything has to appear at a certain time. God is not a guesser.
Right.
Things have to be fulfilled. All right, let's notice now. In the 16th chapter, and I heard a great voice out of the temple saying to the 7 angels, Go your ways and pour out the vials of the wrath of God upon the earth. Now, what portion of the earth are we thinking of? What portion of the earth are we thinking of?
The whole earth.
All of it. Yes, all of it. Not just a piece. We're thinking of all of it. And the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worshipped his image. Well, how many people do you think is going to receive this mark of the beast? All of them.
All of them.
Every single one, except God's true people, the commandment-keeping people of God. So we can see very carefully now here that we're looking at a group of people, wicked people on the earth, that are going to receive this mark.
Yeah, because it says in verse 1 that the vials of wrath are upon the wrath of God upon the earth. And God's wrath is directed toward the wicked, not to the
righteous.
No.
In fact, when this takes place, it's not very long until God's people are taken from the earth, aren't they?
Right.
It says the victory's there. All right, now let's go ahead and look now. Verse 2. And the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worshipped his image. So this first plague is a sore. Please remember this one. It's vitally important to this subject. Now go to verse 3. And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man. And every living soul died in the sea. There is nothing that's more noxious than human blood.
Right.
It's deadly poison. And the third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers and the fountains of waters, and they became blood. Well, they couldn't drink it.
That means then if it's upon the sea and upon the rivers and the fountains of water, there's no drinkable water.
Not a drop to drink. Now, can you imagine? It says what did it say in that third verse? Every living soul died in the sea. Now, can we call that universal?
Yeah.
Oh, I should say so.
It doesn't specify one sea or the other, so it's got to mean all of them.
Have you ever seen a fish that has died?
Oh, they stink.
What happens to them?
Well, they float.
They come to the surface, don't they?
Yeah.
Now, can you imagine on the sea coast, these innumerable bodies?
But the ocean itself is blood, and that stinks.
And that stinks.
Yeah. So and then you have a compound stink of the fish and the creatures in the sea that are dying and coming up.
The eels and the seals and the whales and the sharks and oh, it's devastating. Now then, verse 5. And I heard the angel of the waters say, Thou art righteous, O Lord, which art, and wast, and shalt be, because thou hast judged thus. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and thou hast given them blood to drink, for they are worthy. Mm-hmm. Now, all those things that they have done, just think of Catholicism alone. It's estimated over 500 million martyrs. I saw a book here just a few weeks ago Fox's Book of Martyrs updated, and they're listing hundreds of thousands of people in our time that are also being martyred today by the same controlling power.
By our time, meaning?
Right up to 2004. That people, like in Rhodesia, different places like that, have been slaughtered by the hundreds of thousands.
And
see, I think we're looking too far back.
See, this is not something that was 200 or 300 years back.
No, this is coming up to date. It's like slavery. When you tell people, we're going to have trouble in our country again over the subject of slavery, and they don't believe you until you read it to them. And yes, it has been predicted that slavery will be introduced again to the southern states.
I saw an article on the internet that said that there were a number of different countries who were being considered for sanctioning because they practiced slavery.
Slavery.
Yeah.
It's a terrible thing. Okay, here we go now. Verse 7. And I heard another out of the altar say, Even so, Lord God Almighty, true and righteous are thy judgments. And the fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and power was given unto him to scorch men with fire. Verse 9. And men were scorched with great heat, and blasphemed the name of God, which had power over these plagues, and they repented not to give him glory. Now, they're almost burnt up with this one, scorched. Now, how hot is this going to get? Does anybody know? 7 times hotter.
Where do you see that?
Well, I think we have to go to Isaiah for that. Probably around 30, about 26. I don't know. So let's see if we can find it there. Let's see what we got. 30, 26.
Isaiah 30,
yeah.
verse 26.
Moreover, the light of the moon shall be as the light of the sun, and the light of the sun shall be sevenfold as the light of 7 days, in the day that the Lord bindeth up the breach of his people and healeth the stroke of their wounds. Now, can you think of 7 days heat at 110 degrees? That's not impossible in summertime, is it? I've seen it here, 117. Burn the fruit right on the trees.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the heat of 7 days, 700, nearly 800 degrees. Is it any wonder they cry for the rocks in the mountains and the caves to cover them?
How can they survive?
Well, what's the object of the plagues?
To destroy them.
To destroy them, yes.
So that people then will be going to the poles, I guess, for relief.
Well, maybe run to the beach. That's all blood.
Yeah.
They can't run to the river and hide in the water because that'll be boiling. So they'll go to the caves and the dens of the rocks. Right in our area here, we have caves. That's a very famous tourist attraction. Go to the Oregon caves. Well, can you imagine people would flock to the caves? Right over the mountain from us here is a place called Benton Mine. That Benton Mine has been enlarged. They've taken huge machines in there and they've hollowed out this mountain. The fiber optic line that runs from Japan comes right into the Oregon coast, almost right by within a mile of our home, right over the top of this hill, directly into the Benton Mine. Now, why do you suppose the government has done this?
I haven't got a clue.
I understand that this area is one of the safest areas in case of a fallout. That's one of the boasts that they have. So they have taken this huge mountain and they've hollowed it out. And you could set a city in there. And this is where many of these wealthy people or government people will flee. And this is not the only spot. There's many spots throughout our land that have been prepared for just such a thing. We don't think the wicked understand, but Satan understands. And Satan will make preparation for his agents to preserve life because he cannot give life. And he's doubly bound to try to promote life as long as he can.
Why?
Well, but he has no one to tempt, no one to work through. If all the wicked are destroyed, who's he going to work with? Revelation 20. He's bound by chains of circumstance, you see. Okay. So now we understand that this verse peculiarly applies here. When men are scorched It takes a lot of heat for men to be scorched. All right, now we're on verse 10. And the fifth angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain. Pain? My dear. Let's go a little ways farther. And blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores. Where did the sores come from?
First plague.
The first plague. So then when we have plague 1, it don't stop when plague 2 comes. And when plague 1 and 2 are falling, then plague 3 is poured out. Now we have 1, 2, and 3. So then when plague 4 comes, we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. All over the face of the earth. It's devastating the entire earth.
What about, doesn't she say that I think it's in great controversy that these plagues are not going to be universal because otherwise everybody would be killed?
Well, now, John, I'm so glad you said that. Then read that for us. It's on page 628 in that book. Let's just see what we find.
Well, am I wrong?
Well, I'd like you to read it for me.
Okay.
You know, I've just asked you a very brotherly question.
Yeah, 629,
Yeah.
or 628, right
Yeah.
at the bottom of the page. These plagues are not universal, or the inhabitants of the earth would be wholly cut off.
Well,
That, or do you want me to read more?
was you correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, are you willing to accept that?
Well, it doesn't line up here, though.
It doesn't seem to line up with the Bible, does it?
No.
Well, now let's take the same thought. And
This is the 1911 Great Controversy.
1911 Great Controversy. Now let's go to the same thought, only this time, let's use the original testimony book. Now this is a 58 Great Controversy book here.
All right.
If you want one, I know how you can get one.
Okay.
See, we want people to have this book. This is an inspired book.
She wrote this in 1858.
She wrote this in 1858. It was published in 1858 by James White, her husband. Yes. We feel this book is the correct book. Now listen.
As this book is also found where?
All right, we would recognize the book as Spiritual Gifts Book 1. When the book, we have an original copy just of one volume. In fact, I think we have nearly all the originals, but we have them also in the double, volume 1 and 2, and the second volume is 3 and 4.
That's
And
those
it's
little
called-
short,
Little short black ones.
fat black ones.
Right.
Okay.
And that's called Spiritual Gifts. So this book, Great Controversy, 58, is Spiritual Gifts Book 1.
Okay.
And you may have it in your library. Now, if you do have, we'd like to have you turn to page 198 and 199. And what I'm going to do, it's going to be quite a little bit to read, but I'd like to read it to you. We're on the first paragraph, 198. As Jesus moved out of the most holy place, I heard the tinkling of the bells upon his garments, and as he left, a cloud of darkness covered the inhabitants of the earth. It's a strange thing that in the Daystar articles, we find that when Jesus comes out of the most holy place, we will hear the tinkling of the bells. Now, isn't that a comforting thing? The wicked will think it's thunder, probably. But we'll understand that Jesus is coming out. We will know when Jesus is coming out of that sanctuary.
How long will it take him? Just as is there
All right, now that's a pretty good question.
I don't want to take you away from this subject.
No, it's all apart. That's a pretty good question because there are many people that have tried to single out events so that we know exactly. I'm not sure I can do that. I have read some of these events that others have spent a lot of time on, but I found that some of the supposition may not be correct. And so when we're giving this study, it's simply to encourage you and myself to look at it very carefully. Because if we're not reading the right book, we're going to become confused.
Right.
There's no other way about this. And when we finish this study, I think you're going to realize that you simply cannot trust anybody's writings unless it's inspired. You have to have authorized, inspired material in order to base your faith upon it. If you don't, you can't listen to the minister. There's no way. You can't listen to me. There's no way. We've got to read it from inspired writing. That's the work that we need to do. 1 Thessalonians 5:21. Prove all things. Even the original books We want to know exactly what the truth is. And you know what the truth does? It draws God's people together. And you'll see it happening over and over again. There's a fellowship, a bond there that man's rules and organization can never accomplish. All right, now listen to this. As he moved out, it took a number of days for him to get there, remember? In Daniel 7, 9 and 13. And he was on this cloud and he was born to the holiest of holies. And in Daystar article, it took a number of days. Well, how long is a number of days?
I don't know.
Well, a number of days might have been 360.
True.
You see the point?
Yeah.
We're not sure that we can tell you 15 days. It didn't say in half an hour. It didn't say an hour. It said a number of days. Well, isn't it strange that we'd have a number? If we had time, we'd study about who is the numberer.
We'll do that.
Yeah, we'll have to do that. Who is that? Who's the one that originated all these numbers? Why is it that when God's people were tested on numbers, on time prophecy, it was the closest God's people ever was to him since the creation of man upon the earth? Can you realize that? And 1840 to 44, it was a marvelous manifestation of the power of God. I live to go through that again. It's a marvelous thing. So it could have been a number of days, because if it took a number of days to get the Most Holy, it'll take him a number of days to come back from the Most Holy. And there's a work that he has to do in the first apartment yet.
He has garments to change. Of course, we think of going into a room and in 10 or 15 minutes being, change garments, or maybe 30. Okay,
oh, yeah.
Change our garments. But these are special occasions that he's laying aside his priestly robes for kingly robes.
Oh, yes. Or robes of vengeance.
And robes.
Yeah, see. So everything is wrapped in, can I say, in ceremony. It's enchanting. Now that may not be a good word to use, but it's captivating. And can you imagine, here are millions and millions of angels beholding this scene. And they're actually captivated as they see what happens. Because you see, they've never felt the joy that our salvation brings. They've never felt that joy. When we sing salvation story, remember the song? Angels fold their wings, because they never felt the joy that our salvation brings. Okay? Yeah. If we could just get a glimpse of what Jesus has prepared for his people, I think we'd be different people. The things of this earth would just pass into insignificance. Yeah. Even the trials, they'd not even come close to upsetting us. Okay, so now Jesus has, when he puts on these garments, this darkness covers the inhabitants of the earth. Do we know what darkness means? Well, no sun. Well, darkness means error. That's what the symbolic use of that word darkness means, is the prevalence of error. So when Jesus finishes his mediation, Satan has had control over God's, or not over God's people, over the inhabitants of the earth. There's complete darkness. Error is every place. There is no Holy Spirit. He's been withdrawn. All right. There was then no mediator between guilty man and offended God. While Jesus had been standing between God and guilty man, a restraint was upon the people. But when Jesus stepped out from between man and the Father, the restraint was removed and Satan had the control of man. It was impossible for the plagues to be poured out while Jesus officiated in the sanctuary. But as his work there is finished, as his intercession closes, there is nothing to stay the wrath of God, and it breaks with fury upon the shelterless heads of the guilty sinner. Is that universal?
Yeah.
It's absolutely universal.
Has to be.
Who have slighted salvation and hated reproof. The saints in that fearful time, after the close of Jesus' mediation, are living this side of a holy God without an intercessor. Every case was decided, every jewel numbered. Jesus tarried a moment in the outer apartment from the holy place back to the most holy place, or back to the holy place. From the most holy back to the holy place. He tarried a moment. Jesus, excuse me, I misread that. Every case was decided, every jewel numbered. Jesus tarried a moment in the outer apartment of the heavenly sanctuary, and the sins which had been confessed while he was in the most holy place, he placed back upon the originator of sin, the devil. He must suffer the punishment of these sins. Now, let's ask ourselves a question. Is that before Jesus' second coming or after his second coming?
It's before.
Well, it's before, of course. He hasn't come yet.
Yeah.
The plagues haven't been poured out. It's just impossible for the plagues to be poured out. So these sins have to be placed upon Satan's head. Now, the significance of that is, when that happens, Satan loses his power. He has no more power.
For deception?
For deception, for wounding, for slaying, for cyclones, for anything. He's lost his power at that point. Now listen. Then I saw Jesus lay off his priestly attire.
Wait a minute. Before you get there, let me ask you. There's something you just got through reading there that is kind of awesome, fearful, because it says that God's people are going to have to stand for, it says what, 1 year? Or no, in that time period rather, between when he comes out of the most holy place and is on his way to pick God's people up. It says many days. You said
a number of days.
Yeah. Okay. So there's going to be a time period where we won't have an intercessor. We won't have an opportunity to say, forgive me for this sin or that sin. Mm-hmm. That means then there's a time, there's a work for God's people to be doing right now from the standpoint of overcoming.
Well, I would think that final test comes when it's too late for us to change our attitude and our minds. I think the character has already been formed at this point.
Well, what I mean is, before this event takes place,
right, now,
there's a work for God's people to be doing in before then, right?
Right, now, if Jesus finishes his work in the most holy place,
there is no intercession.
There's no more intercession.
Right.
So then that must mean that our character building is all over with, isn't it?
Right.
All sins have been confessed.
Right.
I think page 4 in Spalding began. When sin is confessed, the work will move. That's all Jesus is waiting for, is for us to confess our sins. That's all he's waiting for. Because he has to put those sins on the head of the scapegoat. Now, when those sins appear on there, you see, probation has closed. The 7 last plagues are beginning to fall. Now, listen to what it says. Then I saw Jesus lay off his priestly attire, no more high priest, clothed himself with his most kingly robes. Upon his head were many crowns, a crown within a crown, and surrounded by the angelic host he left heaven. The plagues were falling upon the inhabitants of the earth. Is that universal? Mm-hmm. That's universal. Then that great controversy book is not correct. Because the same author, they say the same author wrote that one, put her name on it. But you see the discrepancy? Mm-hmm. These plagues are not universal. That's not what was taught. That's not what was taught in the beginning of our history. We know good and well, and I'm going to read you the exact steps that takes place when Jesus lays off this mediation. This is when probation closes. Now listen to what we're going to do here. We're going to take the Spalding and McGann book, and I'm going to use page 2. Now, if you have a Spalding and McGann in your library, you may have one that says 2A. There is no 2A. So you'll need to be very careful when you read Spalding and McGann, because 2A is simply not there. Now we're reading page 2, and it's correct. Now listen, I'm counting down 7 lines from the top. Now it says, then I saw that Jesus' work in the sanctuary will soon be finished. And after his work there is finished, that's his intercession. After his intercession, or after his work is finished, he will come to the door of the first apartment and confess the sins of Israel upon the head of the scapegoat. You won't believe this. Just a few weeks ago, I got an article written by a man in Florida that said, Christ is the scapegoat. couldn't believe what I was reading.
He hadn't studied the sanctuary.
And do you know what was also in the article in the magazine? His obituary. The man's obituary. He wrote the article, they published it, and they published his obituary in the same book. I thought to myself, well, maybe his work was cut short, because he certainly did not understand the Advent message.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this man, an educator, is an educator. Why can't we just take the book just as it reads and form our opinions correctly? This is very easy to understand. Now listen now.
Now this Spalding McGann lines up with the 1850s.
Exactly. Perfectly.
Okay.
Perfectly. And we'll compare another one too. Then he will put on the garments of vengeance. Now there's a ceremony here. So he puts on his garments of vengeance. Now why would he put on his garments of vengeance? Well,
he's come to avenge his people.
The plagues.
Right.
Then the plagues come. All right, listen to what it says now then. Then the plagues will come upon the wicked. Is that universal? That's universal.
Sounds universal.
And they do not come till Jesus puts on that garment and takes his place on the great white cloud. Then, while the plagues are falling, the scapegoat is being led away. The scapegoat is not Christ, that's Azazel. That's Satan. It's a symbol of him. He makes a mighty struggle to escape, but he is held fast by the hand that leads him. If he should effect his escape, Israel would lose their lives. I saw that it would take time to lead away the scapegoat into the land of forgetfulness after the sins were put upon his head. So we can see very clearly that these 7 last plagues will be poured out upon the entire inhabitants of the earth. We're so concerned because, you see, there's a number of things have to happen. The nations of the earth will take their punishment first, won't they?
Yeah.
So we have there...
Well, wait a minute. I thought judgment began at the house of God.
Well, judgment, you think judgment and plagues are the same thing?
No.
No, not necessarily.
No.
Because judgment is all finished here, isn't it?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
See, the judgment is all over with. So we know then that the weight of evidence, in fact is, let's see if we can read it. I had a quotation that I had saved out here. Let's see what it says. Volume 5, page 210. The command is, go through the midst of the city, to the midst of Jerusalem, that's the church, and set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof. These sign-crying ones had been holding forth the words of life. They had reproved, counseled, and entreated. Some who had been dishonoring God repented and humbled their hearts before him. But the glory of the Lord had departed from Israel. Although many still continued the forms of religion, his power and his presence were lacking. You turn to your volume 8, page 250, and you'll find out these words also applied to Seventh-day Adventists today. The presence of Christ has departed from his church.
Where was that again?
In volume 8, page 250. For the presence and glory of God have departed.
What year was that?
Well, that quotation was given about 1913. Let's see if we can find it in a little earlier quotation here. Just take me a second to come to this, I think. I'm going to read number 18 of the testimony. This is the original testimonies, and it's on page 129. Now let's see what it says.
So
we have a date here, 1871.
So if the glory and the presence of the Lord has left a place, he's not there.
Well, would you take that great controversy and turn to 597?
This one here?
Yeah, let's use that one.
The 1911?
Yeah.
597?
597.
All right. Where?
All right, let's see what it says here. Read that right there.
It says, the truth and the glory of God are inseparable.
Okay, now John, now quote the verse again. The place of the divine presence and glory have departed. Volume 8250. So if God's glory departed from the church, then what else left?
Truth.
The truth. So then we are today living under ceremonies, regulations, formalism. We're not hearing the truth. We're not studying the books that contain the truth. And therefore we have abject confusion. If you was back in the days of Noah and Nimrod and those men, you'd say a strange language. Now we say that's a confusion of tongues. But a strange language, I believe, has a deeper meaning than that. Not being able to talk the same way, or arguing over doctrine, or whatever it might be. We have a strange, we cannot harmonize. It's a strange experience. Now listen what this says. This is 1871, number 18, 129. The church has departed from the light, neglected her duties, abused her high and exalted privileges of being peculiar and holy in character, and thereby dishonor her God like ancient Israel. They have violated their covenant to live for Him and Him only. They have joined in with the selfish and world-loving. Pride and love of pleasure and sin are cherished, and Christ has departed. 1871. His spirit has been quenched in the church. Satan works side by side with professed Christians, yet they are so destitute of spirituality and discernment that they do not detect him. That's the same experience that happened to ancient Israel. And we've been living in that all these years. It's that strange.
But if that's the case, then what were James and Ellen doing, in the organization all those many years then?
Well, what were they doing in the organization? She was assigned a job, wasn't she?
Yeah.
All right. She was the eyes to the church. We would call her we say messenger.
Right.
She said she was not a prophet.
Right.
But she would come under the seer. Now I separate that word. Seer. Or it was, God used her as eyes for the church.
Right. And
now it tells us in the testimonies that many in the church would put out those eyes. And that's exactly what they did. They put out the eyes, they began changing and altering the Spirit of Prophecy books until most Adventists don't even read the books. And simply, ministers included, simply have not digested these books so that they'll know exactly what's in them.
When did she pen that statement that books of a different order or a new order would be penned?
All right, that's about 1905.
She wrote that?
Yeah. We could read that. That might be interesting for us to read. Let's see if we can find the book. We're going to get Series B. We need Series B number 7 here, if we can locate it. Here it is. I'm reading Series B number 7, and I'm going to look at page 39. Actually, John, the quotation, I'm on the wrong section here. Let's see if I got the right date. 1903. Significant? That was a General Conference problem, wasn't it? 1901, 1903.
There was a problem with the General Conference and the way it was...
Yeah. Okay, this is what it says now. 1903. The enemy of souls has sought to bring in a supposition that a great reformation was to take place among Seventh-day Adventists. What's a reformation mean? Well,
a
four
change.
things. Yeah, a change. It's actually four things. A change in ideas, theories, practices, and habits. That's what a real reformation means. Or a new organization. Now listen what it says. The enemy of souls has brought in the supposition that a great reformation was to take place among Seventh-day Adventists, and that this reformation would consist in giving up the doctrines which stand as the pillars of our faith and engaging in a process of reorganization. Were this reformation to take place, what would result? Now, In 1903, that's exactly what happened. It's exactly what happened. The principles of truth that God in His wisdom has given to the remnant church would be discarded. Our religion would be changed. The fundamental principles that have sustained the work for the last 50 years would be accounted as error. A new organization would be established. Books of a new order would be written. A system of intellectual philosophy would be introduced. The founders of this system would go into the cities and do a wonderful work. The Sabbath, of course, would be lightly regarded, as also the God who created it. Nothing would be allowed to stand in the way of this new movement. The leaders would teach that virtue is better than vice, but God being removed, they would place their dependence on human power, which without God is worthless. Their foundation would be built on the sand, and storm and tempest would sweep away the structure. What's that mean? The structure.
The organization.
The organization. That's what would sweep it away. Yes. Well,
Can I come back to something here about
Yes.
the scapegoat?
yeah.
What in the church's books, in the denomination books, not in the originals, but in the denomination books, when does it say that sin was placed on the scapegoat?
All right, let's use that great controversy book again. And let's just see if they have taught that correctly, because now we've embraced the original teaching here somewhat.
The 1858 and Spalding McGann agree.
Yeah.
In regard to the sequence of events.
Yeah.
Okay, and it says that the sins of the sins are placed on the scapegoat, Satan, as Christ leaves the most holy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is that correct?
That's correct.
So, let me get this. Okay, the sins in the Spalding McGann in the 1858, it says that sins are placed on the scapegoat as Jesus is leaving the most holy.
Right.
Okay. Now you want me to read in the 1911?
I want you to read there, and now we got to watch very closely. We're going to turn to 658.
658.
658. And we have to watch very closely. But I'm noticing among Adventist people that they have read the book, and yes, this is what brought them into the truth.
But they're not reading carefully.
But they're not reading carefully. And if we're to prove all things, if I was to ask you that question, have you read these books carefully? Oh yeah, I've read them carefully. Well, why haven't you noticed these things? Now let's watch carefully on this, and let's see what we can decide. Right at the top of the page now.
Now the events takes place foreshadowed in the last solemn service of the Day of Atonement, when the ministration in the Holy of Holies had been completed, and the sins of Israel had been removed from the sanctuary by virtue of blood of the sin offering. Then the scapegoat was presented alive before the Lord, and in the presence of the congregation the high priest confessed over him all the iniquities of the children of Israel, and all their transgressions and all their sins, putting them upon the head of the goat. Leviticus 16:21. In like manner, when the work of atonement in the heavenly sanctuary has been completed, then in the presence of God and the heavenly angels and the host of the redeemed, the sins of God's people will be placed upon Satan. He will be declared guilty of all the evil which he has caused them to commit.
All right, now let's kind of recapitulate there. It says there, in like manner, in the presence of the Father. You find that there?
In the presence of God.
Okay, so what does that mean?
The Father.
The Father is there when the sins are placed upon Satan's head. Okay, now what's next?
The heavenly angels.
All right, then the heavenly angels will be there. Now we agree with that.
Okay.
All right, now what comes next?
The host of the redeemed. That can't be.
Well, that's
Because
before his coming.
He hasn't come yet.
The host of the redeemed are not there.
No.
That's a 1,000-year mistake.
Right.
That's a terrible mistake. So you see, that's extremely misleading. These sins are placed upon the head of the scapegoat before Jesus ever comes, before the plagues ever fall. They have made a terrible, terrible mistake on that page.
Okay.
And then they put her name on it. And people read these things and they have absolutely no understanding of what they've read. You see, this is what's so important with inspiration. Do you pray before you read these books? Do you pray before you read your Bible?
You should. These are inspired books.
I imagine a lot of people do. I remember here one time we was giving a little study one afternoon. There was two brethren came, and I was asking them to read certain books of the Bible. You know, they couldn't find the books of the Bible. I looked at these, I couldn't believe it. Where's it at? So, well, here, you've got to go to here. And we've helped them find it. They didn't even know where the books of the Bible were located.
That has a very telling.
The same, an Adventist minister, I think almost 50 years in the ministry, he came to my home. And he challenged me about our books. And I said to him, have you read these books? He says, well, pieces of them. I said, do you own these books? Well, some of them. So I said, now I'm going to tell you something, now, brother. You are not an authority in these books. And if I was you, I'd walk very careful. Because I knew what was going to happen. And you know, he left. We never saw him alive again. He died shortly after that. Yeah. Sometimes a contact that you and I make may be the last contact they have between heaven and earth. Maybe the last one. It's a shame. I know that if you will preserve the Advent message, I know what to expect. Now, I don't know these books inside out, but I want to tell you something. I have enjoyed over 50 years of my life pouring through these books, and I have done that very thing. Listen, 210, Volume 5. This is in your testimony book. The earnest prayers of this faithful few will not be in vain. When the Lord comes forth as an avenger, what does that mean? Well, that means after the plagues have fallen. That means when he comes to the earth, he's come for his people. And when the Lord comes forth as an avenger, he will also come as a protector of all those who have preserved the faith and its purity and kept themselves unspotted from the world. He'll protect you. You want health? Preserve this message.
Because there's a health message in it.
Yeah, there's a health message in it. Absolutely. And if you'll preserve this message, Jesus will give you health. We'll get through this thing without the diseases that the world has.
The Egyptians.
The Egyptian, yeah.
You know, there's a text that you read to us once, and it said that never before has God spoken to his people as he has now. Where is that?
Would you like to read that?
Where is that?
Let's see if we can read that again.
Yeah.
Let's get number
Well,
four.
I mean, I only asked this because of the reference as far as confidence in these writings.
Yeah. Oh, yes. You know, when you shoot the rifle, John. I remember when I was a boy, my dad used to say, "Put your finger alongside the barrel." You know, I was just a boy. And why did you do that?
To help you get focused or
Well,
point toward your target.
it taught me. If I'm pointing at somebody, do I miss him? No. I'm pointing right. I'm pointing at that thing on the table there, and my finger's right on that. Well, when I put my finger alongside the barrel, it seemed that I had a sense of direction. I didn't know what to do out there, and I put my finger alongside it. Bam! Man, hit that thing slick as a whistle. So when you're pointing, this is what God has done. Now listen to what this says. We're in number 27, page 8. In ancient times, God spake to men by the mouths of prophets and apostles. In these days, he speaks to them by the testimonies of his Spirit. There was never a time when God more earnestly instructed his people concerning his will and the course that he would have them pursue than now, through the writings of the testimonies. This ought to be our delight. It ought to be our delight to study the testimony.
Where can that text, that statement be found?
And number 27, page 8.
Is there any reference to that in
the new book? Well, now that might be a little bit difficult, but you could try volume 5. And I'd pay 663. I'm not sure that I can do this, but let's just see what we got here.
That number 27 was page...
It's number 27.
Page
8.
8 at the bottom.
Yeah. Let's just see what we can do. 6:3. This doesn't read the same. Yeah. This does not read the same. We should read, though, we can read another quotation on page 102 in number 27. It's a little difficult to locate sometimes the places because the testimonies have really been revised. They've really been redone. All right, listen to what this says. 102. It is Satan's plan to weaken the faith of God's people in the testimonies. Next, follows skepticism in regard to the vital points of our faith. Now, we've just had a demonstration of that. Here we have someone that has rewritten the Great Controversy book and actually put a lie in there for you to believe, because we know that those sins are not placed upon the head of the scapegoat in the presence of the redeemed. There's no redeemed there.
No, can't be.
Right? Then it says, the vital points of our, the vital points of our faith, the pillars of our position, then doubt as to the Holy Scriptures. Have you heard anyone doubting the Scriptures today? Well, that's not in the original. I hear this all the time. That's not in the original. I understand that our messenger said, take the Bible just as it reads, and you will not be lost. When the testimonies, I missed one little portion, doubt as to the Holy Scriptures, and then the downward march to perdition. When the testimonies once believed are doubted and given up, Satan knows the deceived ones will not stop at this, but he redoubles his efforts until he launches them into open rebellion, which becomes incurable and ends in destruction.
Now that's number 27, page
Page
102.
102, yes. Well, we can see the terrible, terrible discrepancy. I'm looking for another page here in the Present Truth article. I want to use number 2, section 2, please. And I'm going to look on page 57. This is a wonderful, wonderful book. Page 57 in section 2.
Now, are these the Advent Herald?
These are the 1850 Advent Reviews,
Advent
yes.
Reviews,
Yes.
1850. Okay.
Yeah. All right, I'm looking on page 57. Now let's see what James White has to say here. Here we go. I'm going to start at the middle of a paragraph. Then they will be without fault before the throne. Probation has closed. They will confess all their faults while Jesus is in the sanctuary, ready to blot them out, and they will be borne away by the scapegoat just before our high priest comes out to bless his waiting people. Just before he comes out, those sins are placed upon Satan's head.
So you've got 1, 2, 3.
Now we have 3 references
Okay.
that agree. Now we're going to use one more. We're going to go to section 3, and I'm going to use page, let's see, 14, is that what I'm wanting? I'm going to look at this first before you write. Section 3, page 14. This is written by Hiram Edson, who also is a pioneer. We can have no faith in the new doctrine now being taught of probation in the age to come after the second advent. Before Christ comes in the clouds of heaven to raise the dead and change the living saints, the great plan and work of salvation by his blood will be finished. Before our great high priest leaves the sanctuary in heaven, the sins of all Israel will be blotted out and put upon the head of the scapegoat, and by him borne into the land of separation or forgetfulness.
This land of forgetfulness, this was the same place that Satan was committed to after he was expelled from heaven.
Well, it apparently, John, it will be this. unbroken surface of this earth, because the earth will be just tore to pieces, you see. And we know what the water is. We know what the water is. Water's blood.
Yeah.
The streams, what are the streams?
Blood.
They're blood. It didn't say that God was going to heal them.
Well, if the heat is 7 times hotter than normal, then there's no vegetation.
No, vegetation's gone. It's all burnt up.
The animals on the ground are dead.
Well, you know, now that's quite a point there. Let's take your Great Controversy book, and let's turn again to 359. This is a 1911.
Okay.
Now, you brought up the subject of the animals, and I hadn't thought of that, but as you said that, I thought that's kind of an interesting point there. Let's see what it says. Because people have read this, and they've made no comment upon it. All right, right there.
Jesus of Nazareth, the true Messiah.
Now, excuse me just a minute. This is an excerpt from the writings of Joseph Wolfe.
Correct.
It was placed in the Great Controversy book, and of course, Ellen White's name or her approval was put up on this book. Okay, now read it.
Okay. Jesus of Nazareth, the true Messiah, he said, whose hands and feet were pierced, who was brought like a lamb to the slaughter, who was the man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, who after the scepter was taken from Judah and legislative power from between his feet, came the first time, shall come the second time in the clouds of heaven and with the trump of the archangel. Joseph Wolfe, Researchers and Missionary Labors. Oh, and you want me to continue on? Mm-hmm. And shall stand upon the Mount of Olives.
Now wait right there. Now when he comes the second time,
he can't.
He stands upon the Mount of Olives.
Can't.
Is that correct?
No.
That's not correct.
No, he's in the clouds and he summons the redeemed up.
1 Thessalonians chapter 4, we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together to meet the Lord in the air.
Right.
So here we found another error. All right, let's go on now.
And that dominion once consigned to Adam over creation and forfeited it by him, Genesis 1:26 and 3:17, shall be given to Jesus, and he shall be king over all the earth. The groanings and lamentations of creation shall cease, but the songs and praises and thanksgiving shall be heard. When Jesus comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels, the dead believers shall rise first, 1 Thessalonians 4:16, 1 Corinthians 15:32. This is what we Christians call the first resurrection. Then the animal kingdom shall change its nature.
All right, now what did you read?
The animal kingdom shall change its nature.
Now, didn't you just say to me the animals will be destroyed?
They have to be. They couldn't survive during that.
Well, we know every fish, every soul died in the sea.
Right. There's nothing for them to drink.
Nothing to drink, nothing to eat. 7 times hotter than it's wont to be.
Right.
And so the animals, if they can't find a cave or a hole someplace, they're going to get burned and scorched. It says that men were going to be scorched. Have you ever scorched your finger in a fire? Oh, I'm telling you. You're scorched, you're done for.
Yeah.
So then, that's wrong again. The animal creation will not be recreated. I think he quotes Isaiah 11. That's on the earth made new. Okay, go ahead a little bit farther.
Then the animal kingdom shall change its nature and be subdued unto Jesus. Universal peace shall prevail.
Now, I notice you laugh at this. Yeah, here Jesus is coming. The plagues are poured out. Dead bodies all over the earth. And they put in this Great Controversy book that universal peace will prevail at Jesus' second coming. What kind of a doctrine is this? I've had people say, I've read that book 5 times. Well, did you notice that? Never noticed that. Well, what are you reading? What are we reading? Did you know that if we don't have an original, we can't distinguish a false?
Right.
You see?
That's what baffles me, why people are so reluctant to go back to the original books and read them, because if it's one thing that I learned early on, it's that truth does not change.
No.
If it was true when they first started this church, it's true today.
Yeah.
And so it can't change.
Yeah.
So if you want to find out what was true for these pioneers, these Advent pioneers, what's wrong with going to the original books?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And yet it's there. I don't know. There's a resistance to looking at reading these original books. I don't understand it.
That's something that's puzzled me for a long time also. Now, we've just noticed on the 7 last plagues, but we have got problems all through the writings of these changed books. The Jews, when they rewrote the writings of the prophets, they attached a name to it, and they called it Beth Call. That was their version of what the prophets said. And there are some illustrations in the Bible to show how they changed these things. They changed their law read different than the law of Moses, so the first 5 books of the Bible. Today, we have a company of people that have been willing to rewrite or Beth call the writings of the Spirit of prophecy. And when they have done that, they have put their interpretation upon these things. And it's devastating to us, because you remember, the last generation of men and women on the earth will have no guile in their mouth. Now, what does that guile represent?
Truth.
Oh yeah, there'll be no falsehood in their mouth. They will have the pure, unadulterated truth. They will not be defiled. Okay. Wonderful, wonderful situation. All right, let's go back to our Bible verse. I believe we're about on verse 11. 12 we are. And the 6th angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. And I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. Now, we might try to find some explanation there to see if we can understand that just a little bit better. Let me take a testimony here and read this book. It's in volume 5, 451. This is what it says. By the decree enforcing the institution of the papacy in violation of the law of God, our nation will disconnect herself fully from righteousness. Now, when it speaks of the dragon, I want to just look at that one verse a little bit. And out of the mouth, I saw 3 unclean spirits come out of the mouth, and I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon. I'm concerned about that dragon, because we've always used that dragon to symbolize Satan. But remember the quotation, Testimonies to Ministers, page 39, says, kings, governors, rulers have placed upon themselves a brand of Antichrist and are represented as the dragon. It's a very good one to remember.
Where is that again?
I'm going to get that testimony book, because I was afraid I may have misquoted that page number. So give me a second here, and I'll find that page. I quoted page 39, and it'll do well for us to make sure we have that. All right. Kings and rulers and governors have placed upon themselves the brand of Antichrist and are represented as the dragon who goes to make war with the saints, with those who keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus. Now, the faith of Jesus and the testimony of Jesus means the same thing. So those people that keep God's commandments and have the testimony of Jesus Christ, they're the ones that are going to receive this. All right, back to volume 5, page 451. By the decree enforcing institution of the papacy in violation of the law of God, our nation will disconnect herself fully from righteousness. When Protestantism shall stretch her hand across the gulf to grasp the hand of the Roman power, then she shall reach over the abyss to clasp hands with spiritualism. When under the influence of this threefold union, our country shall repudiate every principle of its constitution as a Protestant and republic government, and shall make provision for the propagation of papal falsehoods and delusions. Then we may know that the time has come for the marvelous working of Satan, and that the end is near. That'll be Satan's last great deception. Now, we had kings, governors, and rulers. We would use that as pagan Rome, because we go back to Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Those were the systems of pagan worship. Well, when the abomination of desolation came along, papacy after 538 AD, then we had papal Rome.
Right.
See? Well, now that we come down to our time, we don't seem to locate pagan Rome anymore. Well, that's gone. Well, no, it hasn't gone, because the very same system of government and worship and force is exercised today in government as it was back in those days of Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and Rome, anciently. And we know the Roman Empire ended, as far as imperial, in 508 AD. Now then, if that is the likeness, the characteristic, then we have this pagan power in the last great movement just before Jesus comes, and we would call that pagan Rome. But the enforcement of the Sunday is a papal institution. Now that union between church and state is what formed that image in the first place. So then we have papal Rome, but we have spiritualism involved here. And the churches today, the denominational churches who have accepted the spirits, the doctrines of spirits, or have become spiritualism or spiritualists, we would call that Protestant Rome. So we have three forms of worship: pagan Rome, papal Rome, and Protestant Rome. And that actually can be proven from the Spirit of Prophecy books. Let me take the word to little flock. And let's notice this. I'm going to read on page 19. And by the way, now these books are available. If somebody wants them, they need just to contact us. On page 19, let's read this. I saw all that would not receive the mark of the beast and of his image in their foreheads or in their hands could not buy or sell. I saw that the number 666 of the image beast was made up. Now, who is it that makes that? Who is it that enforces this image? Because we see right there. Now, they give you a supplement note in the back of this little book. The church put it in there. That evidently was put in there by Joseph Bates, that he wrote that in there. Now, there's no indication whatsoever that Joseph Bates put that in there. Now, if he did put it in there, I'd be very happy, because he is correct. But I believe that Sister White put that notation there, that I saw that the number 666 of the image beast was made up. Now, I think what we need to understand is these are events that takes place just moments, as it were, before probation closes. Please notice this now. This is Life Incidents 245. But many of the people of God are yet to be found in connection with these churches, and are yet to be called out. Revelation 18:4. And when this shall be accomplished, and the good have all left the nominal churches, when the saving influence of such is all withdrawn from their communion, then we shall have most fitting material for the formation of an image to the beast. Now, if the good have all left the fallen churches, what's left?
Corrupt.
Only the corrupt is left. It's the church that makes the image, or forms the image. Someone has to grant them the power to do this.
Well, now, it's interesting you say that, because I know there's another statement, I think, in Ellen White in Desire of Ages, where she says that what took place, or how the church was in the time of Christ, is going to be represented again in the last day church.
All right, we'd read that in 232 in Desire of Ages, and it's one of the best quotations in the book. I've used it many times.
So that means then that just the way that the church was toward Jesus when he walked this earth, it means that they're going to have the same attitude toward God's people at the end of time.
Exactly. Now, he said he had to gather out those that were to carry the gospel commission. Not in the church.
No.
He had to gather them out of the church. And the same with today. The image has to be formed in the church. In other words, as we read on, we'll see that the good have had to separate. All right, and it goes on now. From their communion, then we shall have most fitting material for the formation of an image to the beast. For they will then be ready for any acts of persecution and oppression against the people of God, which Satan can induce those to enter upon who are led captive by him at will. And where could we more naturally look for an image to the mother of harlots than to the daughters? We may be sure that the child will develop in the perfect image of its mother. Then let these fallen churches, from whom the good have all departed, and the grace of God is withdrawn. Does that ring a bell? We just read number 27. The Spirit of Christ has departed. That's a fallen church. Be formed into an ecclesiastical organization, and let the government grant it power, which of course it will not have till the government grants it power, to enforce its dogmas under the pains and penalties of civil law. And what do we have? An exact image, the first beast, a church clothed with power to enforce its doctrines upon dissenters with fire and sword, that the churches in the condition to which these are fast tending will be ready for such a work, history and analogy abundantly prove. And here would be an organization separate from the government, constituting no part of it, yet created by it, and forming a most perfect counterpart to the prophecy of the image of the beast. So, you see, it's the church that enforces this restriction upon God's people. It's a strange thing that what will happen among God's people. The persecution that's going to come. All right, now, with these plagues, if you can get a CD on this little disc on this little clock, and you can hear it read, or you can read it yourself. And on page 8 and 9, we find the time of trouble. The time of trouble is not a distinct time for God's people. The time of trouble is the trouble of the nations. I hear all the time, do you think we're in a little time of trouble?
Yeah.
And I ask people, well, have you ever read that? Well, yeah, I've read it. Well, would you mind finding that for me? And we was in one study one time, a lady had a computer there, and she had the CD-ROM. And she says, well, yeah, I can find that. I'll pull it up on my CD. I said, well, we'll wait for you to do that. So she got that thing warmed up, and it wasn't there. It's not there. I don't think it's possible for us to have a little time of trouble. I think this thing is going to be devastating.
Yeah.
Thing. And if we haven't prepared for this, where we're going to be.
Yeah. Now these plagues apply to the wicked. Okay. Now God's people are protected, right?
Yeah, right.
Now, just as the last 7 plagues in the time of Moses never touched the children of Israel, these plagues, these 7 last plagues, they won't touch God's people.
Not God's people.
So, elsewhere in the scriptures it says their bread and water will be
sure.
So when these people don't have anything to drink and nothing to eat, God's people are still going to have something. He's going to take care of them just like he did Elijah.
Well, that creates a little thought in my mind. Let's see if I can pull this up here quick enough while we're talking about that. There's a verse, I believe it's in Isaiah, and perhaps even in Ezekiel. Now let me just see if I can find this. I'd sure love to read that to you right now, and I possibly won't be able to find it quick enough. But when you say our bread and water shall be sure.
Yeah, I think that's in Psalms, isn't it?
Huh?
I believe that's in Psalms.
Yeah, yeah. All right, now let's see what I've got here. I'd sure like to locate that verse here.
Just a second.
And it says, the bread of affliction and the water of adversity. Now, I'm not sure we're going to have something to eat every day as we go through that time of trouble.
Yeah, no.
Look at Isaiah chapter 30.
Chapter 30.
Yeah. Okay.
So if we don't have a meal every day, it's nothing to worry about, but he'll make sure that we survive.
The God won't lose any weight.
Yeah.
John, read 30 and 31 for us. Let me see now. 20. Start reading with, let's see. I don't think I have do I have a 30 and 31 in that chapter? I think I may have
Chapter 30?
Chapter 30.
Yeah, there's 30.
Okay, read it for us.
It says, "And the Lord shall cause his glorious voice to be heard, and shall shew the lightning down of his arm, with indignation of his anger, and with the flame of a devouring fire, with scattering and tempest and hailstones. For through the voice of the Lord shall the Assyrian be beaten down, which smote with the rod." And in every place, I guess that's not it.
All right, now the Assyrian is the wicked world.
Right.
So it really does apply to this time of the pouring out of the plagues.
Right.
Now read 20 and 21.
"And though the Lord give you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, yet shall not the teachers be removed into a corner any more, but thine eyes shall see thy teachers, and thine ears shall hear a word behind thee, saying, This is the way, walk ye in it, when ye turn to the right hand and when ye turn to the left."
Okay. So the teachers are in an adverse situation. And do you notice what it says there? The bread of adversity and the water of affliction.
Right.
So I'm not convinced that as we pass through this terrible, distressful time, that it's not going to be like an hour of temptation. Everyone's true character is going to be revealed. Everyone. And if you'll see where you have failed to develop a certain type of character, you'll know that. Now, our sins have been forgiven us. We know that. And at this time, God's people are ready for Jesus to come. But still, there seems to be some that will stand closer to Christ on the earth made new. Mm-hmm. Because they overcame more. Their victory was more complete. Maybe there will be some there that will not even be close to the throne of Christ. You read that last chapter of Great Controversy. Those that have overcome the most will be the closest to Christ in his kingdom, in his throne. So it's possible that there is a degree of what can we say, of victory. Like the martyrs with the hem of blue, or was it red, around their garments. It's a mark of distinction, what they passed through.
Right.
Okay? And we don't know that maybe there'll be martyrs in the last days. I'm quite sure that there might be. So I do see a mark of achievement there, not of superiority by no means. But I see a mark of achievement, and that's why we noticed the four creatures instead of the four beasts. I think that was a very poor translation word there. Those four creatures, outstanding characteristics, like Moses, the meekest man that was ever born on the face of the earth. He might well be one of those four living creatures that would stand right in the very presence of the Father. Okay, so now we understand that. The plagues, as they're poured out on the wicked, on the nations of the earth, it seems to create a hatred, a burning hatred because of one thing. Now, what would come to your mind?
Well, the righteous aren't affected by these plagues.
Well, no, they're not. They're not thirsting to death.
No.
They're not being scorched.
Right.
So the nation. What do you think the nations will say? They're the ones that's causing our trouble.
The troublers of
They're the ones. They're the ones. Okay, now. So a writing. Now you're going to find this on page 9. 9 and 10. Then we come to a portion of the pouring out of the plagues that is called the time of Jacob's trouble. There's two distinctions there. There are two distinctions there. The time of Jacob's trouble will be the anguish that the nations are going to place this death decree upon God's people. And this is where they'll pass through that, the time of Jacob.
How will they distinguish them? They are going to be those who certainly haven't been affected by the plague. They don't have the sores. They're not affected by the blood or the
heat.
The heat, yeah. So, I guess they see these people, or is there some other distinguishing mark about these people? How are they going to know these people are the people of God?
Can you recognize a child of God today?
Yeah.
Well, at one time we'd go shopping. We'd look as we'd meet people and see people. So there's an Adventist. Can you do that today?
Difficult.
Yeah, you can hardly do that anymore, especially among the young people. You'll see the same type of dress, the same type of hair, the same type of everything on the young people, and you can't distinguish them. You can't distinguish them. I might tell you a story. I was in the airport in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was trying to find my bags. And the man came to help us, and I said, well, we've come in, and we can't find our bags. Well, where'd you come from? So we told him. And he said, well, I know where you're at. So,
you're talking about a sky cat?
Yeah, it's sky cat.
Yeah.
So just like a flash, down the hallway we went, the tramway, and it took us right to a big old pile of boxes and suitcases, and there was our material and our books and everything. I was so happy to see those things. And he got them all loaded up, and he says, now I'll take you to your car. And I said, I don't have a car. Well, what do you want me to do with these? I said, well, somebody's going to come pick me up. Well, do you know him? No, I've never seen him before. Do you know his name? Yeah, I know his name. You have never seen him? No, I've never seen him before. Well, how are you going to recognize this man? And this man was getting irritated at us. He said, well, do you have his phone number? No, I don't have his phone number. Do you have his address? No, I don't have his address. Well, tell me something. How are you going to recognize this man? And I said, I'll recognize him. I'll bet you $5 I'll recognize him. Oh no, he wasn't going to lose his $5. So finally he said, no, he says, I'm getting a little upset here. He said, what am I going to do with these bags? I said, well, I'm sure this man's going to pick us up. Well, he says, now, if he doesn't have a car, you don't have a phone number, you don't know his address, you know nothing about this man, you've never seen him before, I don't know how you're going to recognize him. I'll guarantee you, I'll recognize him. Now, I want to give you one more chance to make $5. No, he says, I won't do it. So as we were talking, I happened to look down at, now there were literally hundreds of people looking for their bags.
Which airport was it?
Atlanta, Georgia, the largest area of airport in the world. And I looked down the tramway, and there I saw a man walking towards me. Now, he's a long ways down there. And I look at this man. Now, that man knew me, because he'd seen me on video. I'd never seen him. So I looked down there, and I said to the sky cap, I said, see that man right there? He's the one that's come to get me. Oh, no, he says, no. He said, have you ever seen him before? No, I've never seen him before. So I took right off down right at this man. We got close to one another. He called me by name, and oh, we had a big hug right there. It was a wonderful reunion. So as we turned back to the bags and the sky cap, and he was standing there. He had his head in his hands. He just lost $5. He would have got another $5, see? So I said, tell me something. How did you recognize him? I said, I recognized him by the light in his eyes. And I did.
Yeah.
I actually did. I recognized that look on that man's face that he was serving the Lord Jesus Christ. And then I asked him, do you serve the Lord Jesus Christ? Oh, man. He said, I'm an elder in the church. But he did not have the experience. It's the message that changes the attitude of people, you see. We're not looking for superiority. Yeah. We want to be saved. We want our brothers and sisters to be saved. And these plagues that are poured out, this terrible, terrible animosity against God's people? Well, because of these 7 last plagues. But it will not be the time of Jacob's trouble among the nations. That is a personal experience that the nations have placed upon God's people, and we call that a death decree. And God's people will be delivered from that. Now, please remember, there is a partial resurrection that takes place at this time, isn't there? This is between the 6th and 7th plague. And that partial resurrection, then those that have kept the Sabbath, they come forth from their dusty beds to hear the covenant of peace. Now, we might want to read that.
Well, now, these are people who have come in under the first and second angel's message, correct?
These people, yes, these people, well, honestly, could we say that? I can't say that they would come in under that time period, but they have had an experience in the first and second and third angel's message. And how would people in our day get an experience in those?
In our day?
Yeah.
Only by the books.
Only by the books. Because we have read what they wrote. We have read what they wrote. And that's how we have an experience in that first and second angel's message. Because you'll never hear it being preached from the pulpit today.
There's a statement, I'm trying to think of where it's at, but I cannot think of where it's at. But Ellen White makes a statement, says, if you want to know what Ellen White believes, read her published work.
Yeah, and I can quote that to you. And
where's that at?
It's a Review and Herald, Book 5, page 110.
All right.
Review and Herald, Book 5, page 110. You should read that first and the second column.
Oh, wait a minute. Now, you got it by book and
Review and Herald, Book 5.
Yeah, but what about the date?
The date, 1905.
1905. What month and?
John, I'll have to get the book to show you. Let's see what we can find here.
Because most people don't go by books.
Books. If they have a CD, they won't make it, will they?
Right.
Okay. 105. Now let's see if I got the right page now. Did I say 105?
Yeah, you meant book 5.
Book 5, 110. That's what the problem is. Okay, here it is. It is January 26, 1905. I said if any of the citizens of Battle Creek wish to know what Mrs. White believes and teaches, let them read her published books, or the books that she published. Now that quotation has been changed. And if you want to read the changed quotation, volume 5 of your testimony book, 696. Now here's the volume 5 right there. 696.
They changed it?
They changed it. I'll let you read that for us.
696.
Yeah, and it's the top of the page.
Okay. And now to all who have a desire for truth, I would say, do not give credence to unauthenticated reports as to what Sister White has done or said or written. If you desire to know what the Lord has revealed through her, read her published works. Are there any points of interest concerning which she has not written? Do not eagerly catch up and report rumors as to what she has said.
Okay. Read her published works is what they've changed it to.
Right.
But now listen to the original one. If any of the citizens of Battle Creek wish to know what Mrs. White believes and teaches, let them read her published books.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Well, that doesn't mean letters and manuscripts or diary entries. That's fooling lots of people today. Well, Sister White's diary. Well, she ate clam chowder. She was hungry and she ordered some clam chowder. I've heard that old stuff for years. No. A diary can be made up by anybody. Anybody. Now we have this as a wonderful source, but listen to what it goes on to say. I present before our people the danger of being led astray as were the angels in the heavenly courts. The straight line of truth presented to me when I was but a girl is just as clearly presented to me now. There's been no change.
Truth is always truth.
Truth is always truth. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. We're going to read one little quotation here from our volume 5, or our 1858 Great Controversy book. It's on page 205 and 206. Now, there have been some changes that's listed in this book. When they took this book and they redid this book, they changed the name and they called it Early Writings. So when you see Early Writings, and I'm sure it's a favorite probably most of you, Early Writings was not written by Sister White. It was arranged by the church people. And they put this Early Writings book out and put her name on that. But if you'll do the comparing between Early Writings and your 58 Great Controversy, which is the original, then you're going to find a lot of things in there that really straighten you up. Now listen to what this says.
You're in what book now?
I'm on 205, the 58 Great Controversy. It was at midnight that God chose to deliver his people. As the wicked were mocking around them, suddenly the sun appeared, shining in his strength, and the moon stood still. The wicked beheld the scene with amazement. Signs and wonders followed in quick succession. Everything seemed turned out of its natural course. The saints beheld the tokens of their deliverance with solemn joy. Now they were passing through the time of Jacob's trouble, you see. The streams ceased to flow. Dark, heavy clouds came up and clashed against each other. But there was one clear place of settled glory, from whence came the voice of God like many waters, which shook the heavens and the earth. There was a mighty earthquake. The graves were shaken open, and those who had died in faith under the third angel's message, keeping the Sabbath, come forth from their dusty beds, glorified, to hear the covenant of peace that God was to make with those who had kept his law. So we understand that those that had kept the Sabbath faithfully, that died into faith. Now, I don't think it says from 1844 or from 1848. It didn't say that. So I believe that there are...
but it says they had died in faith under the third angel's message.
Keeping the Sabbath. Well, are we under the third angel's message?
Yes.
Okay. Then could it be possible that some of us might be called forth if we pass into the grave?
Go into the grave, yeah.
Well, I think so. I think I've noted 5 places in the testimonies where people died after 1848 or 1844 that will come up in the general resurrection. They'll not be among the 144,000.
Yeah.
See? So I think that this is a very special class of people that God has selected to pass through this time of Jacob's trouble. And some of those that have died and gone to the grave will be awarded to hear that covenant of peace the Father makes with those people that have kept his Sabbath and kept his commandments. So I think there's a lot about this generation of people that we are not clear upon yet. The sky opened and shut and was in commotion. The mountains shook like a reed in the wind and cast out ragged rocks all around. The sea boiled like a pot and cast out stones upon the land. And as God spake the day and hour of Jesus' coming, you see, Christ doesn't come when that partial resurrection takes place, and delivered the everlasting covenant to his people, he spake one sentence and then paused while the words were rolling through the earth. The Israel of God stood with their eyes fixed upward, listening to the words as they came from the mouth of Jehovah, and rolled through the earth like peals of loudest thunder. It was awful solemn. At the end of every sentence, the saints shouted, "Glory, hallelujah." Their countenances were lighted up with the glory of God, and they shone with the glory as did Moses' face when he came down from Sinai. The wicked could not look upon them for the glory. And when the never-ending blessing was pronounced on those who had honored God in keeping his Sabbath, there was a mighty shout of victory over the beast and over his image. Then it says, commenced the Jubilee. Now, that is a very important, I use that so many times, because we can actually trace the Jubilees to 1843. Very, very directly. This time prophecy reaches down almost to the exact time of Christ's coming. And it is, would you believe, a time prophecy. Because the Jubilee was the release year. It's an opposed to. We had 49 years of servitude.
Right.
We had the 50th year was release. And if we took up from the time that Moses recorded that in Leviticus 25, we'd come down 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, all the way down through time. Or we could figure it from 607 BC when Daniel was led into captivity. So those Jubilee years would end up in 1843. If we added now 3 more Jubilee years of 50, we would have 50, 50, 50, 150 years from 1843 would give us 1993. So we know that the Jubilee years are still in effect as far as that's concerned. Because when the saints inherit the earth made new, or when Jesus comes and grants them victory, then that release comes and Satan has no more power over us.
That doesn't mean then that we'll have to wait until 50 years from 1890.
Oh, no. No, it doesn't. I think if you tabulate that correctly, you might come to about 2043 or something like that. 200 years will be 2043. No, what I think this is meaning, we have 3 dispensations. We have the legal, which ended in 34 AD. But 7 years before that legal dispensation ended, we had another dispensation that began. And we call that the dispensation of the gospel dispensation, which really, it should have been called the dispensation of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Now then, that dispensation started 7 years before the legal ended. Now that is a type. And if that happened once, that same illustration, if the scripture would use it in this direction, that would happen again. We find that in Ephesians 1:10. Paul calls it the dispensation of the fullness of time. Now, the fullness of time could be, if we would figure those Jubilee years, 1993. Well, if that 7 years could be applied at that time, then that would bring us down to about 2000 or 2001. So you see, we are living in this very time right now. Because the dispensation of fullness of time would reach 7 years before the gospel was complete, all the way through the 1,000 years until the dispensation was complete, the fullness of time had come, and God's name was vindicated. So yes, we could be living in that time, and when the Jubilee would commence with the announcement of Christ coming, that would pertain to that dispensation, and we would live in that when release is brought back to us. Can you imagine Abraham was deeded this earth? It was his. And to his children. Now, lineage is not by just name. Lineage is determined by characteristic. Do you have the characteristics that Abraham had? Yes. Do you teach the same message that Abraham taught? Yes. That's ecclesiastical transmission. It's not the laying on of hands of brother to brother. That don't do it. I certainly remember a young man who was being ordained, and I was watching this. And they put their hands on his head. And when the service was over, he came out and he says, I felt a power go clear through my body when they laid their hands on my head. I said, my dear brother, you certainly haven't read the testimonies, because you didn't receive not one thing. If you didn't already have it, those men didn't give it to you. And you know, that guy went to his grave here not too long ago, probably still thinking the same thing. And he was seeped in problems. Well, we know what's ahead.
We have another angel.
All right, right. Okay, shall we read that for us?
17, it says, the 7th angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven saying, from the throne saying, it is done. And there were voices and thunders and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great. And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And great Babylon came in remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. And there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent. And men blasphemed God because of the plague of hail, for the plague thereof was exceeding great.
All right, did you notice it speaks there about the third part? Did you, when you read that, did you recall
The three
it?
parts, the city, the great city was divided into three parts.
Into three parts. Do you understand that somewhat? All right, let's take a look. Let's go back to Zechariah. And let's use chapter 14. I think we'll take the last portion of chapter 13. Let's look at verse 8 and 9, and then we'll read verse 14:1. And it shall come to pass that in all the land, saith the Lord, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die. 2 parts. But the third shall be left therein. And I will bring the third part through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined, and will try them as gold is tried. And they shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people, and they shall say, the Lord is my God. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and the half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. All right, now listen. It says, the third part he will bring through. If we drew a circle here, and we divided that into 3 parts, and we would use the figure 33 and a third.
Right.
That's as close as we can get. 33 and a third, and 33 and a third, and 33 and a third. Now we have 3 parts. So the 2 parts he would destroy.
Right.
Now add up 33.3, 33.3, what do you get?
66 and 6.
666. That's the ones he's going to destroy. But the other part, the 1/3, the lesser part, the remnant, he'll bring through all this. So it's an indication that this also is referring to that 666.
Elder Bates, I've got one little question before we end this. Back in the second and third angel's plague being poured out, it says that the oceans, the seas, and the rivers were turned to blood. But down here in chapter 16, verse 12, it says, the 6th angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up. How do you reconcile that to the 2nd and 3rd angels' vial being poured out upon the water and turned to
what does the waters represent?
Well, in prophecy, it represents people.
Right, multitudes and peoples and nations, you see. Now, we understand that the Advent message in 1840 began with the fall of the Ottoman Empire. We call it today Turkey. In ancient time, we would say Constantinople. Today, we would call it Istanbul. If you would look at the map, the world map, you'd see that the Dardanelles, that waterway, goes up into Istanbul. It's one of the most important waterways, probably in Europe. Turkey occupies that territory. Now, the great nation that's close to that is, we call it Russia. And Russia has no warm waterways. It's a north country. They have no warm waterways. And so Russia has been interested in the Dardanelles for many, many years, way back, more than 100 years. They want those Dardanelles, but the United States is interested in the Dardanelles. France, England, Japan, they're all interested in that same waterway because it's a gateway into all of Asia. Now I could be wrong on some of my geographic explanation here, but I don't think I am. So if we understand Turkey occupies that position, a common teaching among us was that Russia was the king of the north. I don't really understand it that way. Turkey seems to play a very important part in the closing scenes, and that's why it's speaking about the great river Euphrates. Those waters represent multitudes and peoples. As the nations fell, we didn't lose territory. The territory was still there. We didn't lose people because those people were consumed in those upcoming nations. Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and Rome. And so as we had the divisions in the kingly portion of Rome, we also have those nations still existing and those people still existing today. Now, those four heads, now you notice what it speaks about there, upon the great river Euphrates, and the waters thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. Now that indicates more than one king, doesn't it?
Right. Plural.
Now, in my understanding, through the years, I've had a very keen interest on Turkey. If Turkey would be driven from its seat in Turkey, Istanbul, if they would be driven from there, where would they go? The Sultan would have to go someplace. He'd have to escape to someplace. Well, the only place he had would be his mosque in Jerusalem. And that's where the Sultan would go. And I believe that all nations now are intently looking at this sick man of the East, because Turkey cannot defend itself. It has not enough power.
Right.
In 1840, when Egypt declared war on them, they would have lost the war. But there we had Britain, Prussia, Russia, and France all came to their aid, the aid of the Turk, and they saved him from destruction. Well, the same thing is happening today. It's quite interesting. About 1997, there was an agreement made between Turkey and the United States. But shortly after that, Turkey reneged, and they joined with Iran and Iraq. And that's where they stand today. So we see the same animosity, and it very well may possibly be that all these troubles in Iran and Iraq is not what we think it is. It might be who is protecting this sick man of the East, you see. And that's what that plague is being poured out upon. I don't think that Megiddo is going to be the last battle that's going to be fought. I believe we're going to find the whole world is going to be the battlefield. Every nation on the face of the earth will be involved in this. The key position, oil is one of the main objects today. 80% of the oil that's being pumped from the earth is used for plastic. Even our automobiles are nearly all made out of plastic. And that reserve of oil is what produces that market of plastics today, is the oil that's pumped out of the earth, you see. So I believe that prophecy can be fulfilled. And we will have, Turkey will play an important part in this, although I do not believe that Turkey is the king of the north. I think that is a usurpation, that Satan has usurped that authority. We know from Psalms 48, verse 1 and 2, that Christ is the king of the great city on the sides of the north. So Christ is the true king of the north. Satan has only usurped this position. And when you get to Daniel 11, I don't know if I can remember the verse, about 46, tidings out of the east shall trouble him, and they shall come to his end, and none will help him. Well, those tidings, William Miller thought that was Bonaparte. But we think today that those tidings out of the east will be the loud cry message that God's people will proclaim. And this is what troubles the usurped king of the north and Satan, and this is when he comes to his end. That's another deep subject, and probably
I can see we've delved into this particular subject some, but
yeah.
It sounds like there's much more.
Much more there. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your time on this subject matter.
You see, a study to show thyself approved. We're not educated people, but we've got the Bible and the Spirit of prophecy.
Right.
And if you'll be faithful, John, even a half an hour a day, you're going to be amazed in a short time what you will really know.
Right. Thank you.